Hello, everybody. We are so pumped to have you here. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Christy. I'm a conversation designer who works at Schwab, and I'm one of the co-organizers for this meetup. We're called the Conversational Collective. We are so excited to have you here. This is our first event of the year, so welcome. We host events every third Wednesday of every month, so feel free to check us out. We're going to have multiple different events coming up in the rest of the year, lots of programming, really fun stuff coming up. Just a quick shout out to the rest of my co-organizers. If you guys want to say hi in the chat or give a little wave on your camera, we work really hard behind the scenes to try and organize the programming, and we're super grateful to have you all joining us tonight. So just a quick explanation of how things are going to work and a little introduction to who we are. So the Convo Collective is a community of people who are passionate about learning and creating and designing all things conversational technology. We started out in Austin, Texas as an in-person meetup, and as things went virtual, we were able to expand our reach and really include people from all over the world to join us and join our community. So we want to invite you to join our community as well. We have a Google form that you can fill out. The link is in the slides that are showing right now, or we'll also post the link in the chat. If you fill out the form, then you can get access to our newsletter and see where you can find us online, join our Slack channel, our LinkedIn group, our Facebook group, our social media. And if you get the newsletter, then you'll know exactly what event is coming up and what day it's happening and what topics we'll be covering. So we hope you'll consider to join us there as well. And we are also looking for sponsors. So if you are looking to sponsor a community that is passionate about conversational design, please reach out to us. There's also a link in the presentation about where you can apply to be a sponsor, or just reach out to us in the chat as well. So a quick rundown of how things are going to work today. We have a Slido set up so that you can send your questions during the event. If you RSVP'd via Eventbrite, we also uploaded some of those questions that you filled out in your RSVP form. So your question may already be there. Be sure to thumbs up the questions that you like so that we can see which questions are the most popular. So if you pre-submitted a question, check to see if your question is there and thumbs it up, or resubmit if you don't see it. And so we are going to post the link to the Slido in the chat as well, so you can easily click on it. And we're going to have a slide up where the event number on Slido is available, so you can go to Slido, enter the event number, and then it'll show you the page where you can submit your question. All right, so during the panel, we're going to spotlight the panelists. So in Zoom, if you have the side-by-side view on, you'll be able to see a static slide that I'll have with our panelists' information, as well as their faces next to them. So that's the most convenient view for you to see everything. Just a heads up if you want to change your settings now. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the intro. So let me go ahead and do a quick switch, just a second. Let's see. Okay. Let me share my screen once more. All right, can everybody see that? Give me a quick thumbs up if you can. All right, awesome. Okay, so we are going to get started. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for creating a winning conversational strategy. We are super pumped to dive into this topic. So I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves. If you guys could please tell us your name, your current role, and what you think of when you hear conversational design in 2 to 3 words. So what are the first things that pop into your head? Let's start with Michelle.
All right, so my name is Michelle. I'm a senior conversation designer at Haptik, and I've been designing conversations since 2017. That's when we really started our enterprise business, and we've helped take conversation design at Haptik from 1 person to now a team of around 5 people. And Yeah, it's been a crazy journey. We've done a bunch of things, create our playbook, and we'll talk about it anyway. So, what I think of when I hear, I think the term was conversation design, right? That's what I'm
Yes.
supposed to. Yes. So I think about empathy. I think that's the first word that pops up. Um, People, very obviously, and yeah, empathy, people, and I think the word happy is suddenly what's turning up. I'm sure there's a better way to express it, and I'm excited to see what everyone else says.
I think that's a great term. I mean, people talk about the happy path a lot in conversation design. That totally makes sense. And it makes me happy. So, you know, let's go to James next.
Hi, my name is James Silva, and I'm the CEO and founder of ConciergeBot, which is a white label AI virtual assistant platform automating customer support via voice and messaging. And what I think about when I think about conversational design is I think about brand. Like I think that brand strategy and branding of conversation is something that's an important part of any conversational design. The customer that you're building for, the way that the bot speaks. The other I think about is nuance. Like I think about conversational design as like being nuanced by language, culture, generational speak, education, all of those things. So I would say that those are my when I think of conversational design, those are the things I think of.
Right on. Thanks, James. Nick, you're up.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nick Dokich. I'm the CEO of ULIMI, and we make smart software for the future of work, really focused on workforce performance and internal business operations and how to automate, things to give back valuable time to people. And I think for me, when I think of conversational design, it's two words, human-centric and voice-first. I think those are, really good guideways to think about when we're going through conversational design.
Right on. And Brandon.
Thanks for having me. Brandon Kaplan, I'm the CEO of Skilled Creative, and we are a full service voice creative agency based in New York, working with brands like HBO, Warner Music Group, Pottermore, Nutella, Meredith Corporation, helping them to figure out what voice is and how do they build out voice programs. So a lot of fun with education and building there. When I think about conversational design, actually same word as James. I immediately thought nuanced because there are so many layers to how you intelligently design conversation. I'd also say creative. If it's not backed by a creative strategy, it's not really going to work. So it's nuanced, but it's got to be creative. But thanks for having me.
Of course. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much. Those were some amazing terms to think of, and we can keep those in mind as we move forward with questions. So the first question that I have for this panel is, do you ever use any canvases, templates, or playbooks to create and define your conversational strategy? Let's start with Michelle. You mentioned that you created a playbook in your role. Do you want to expand on that?
Sure. I think it's important to set the definition of playbook. A lot of times, I think what we mean by playbook is it's a simple template that can be copied a bunch of times. But also playbook includes all the best practices and all of our learnings throughout the years. So Chrissy, could you repeat the question once more, please?
Yes, if you use any templates or playbooks to create your conversational strategy. So how did you create your playbook and how has that affected your team and your work?
Sure. So yes, we do have a playbook at Haptik that contains all of our best practices from what we've learned over the years. And it's not only a bunch of like templates that can be copied. We have a feature in our platform we call Smart Skills. It's essentially journeys that you can replicate a bunch of times that are divided into multiple domains. So we have insurance templates and templates on mortgages and so many other things that can be copied. But primarily the use of these things is, number one, to ensure that it's a distillation of what we've learned throughout the years, right? And none of our designers need to redo the work every single time. So if I've built an amazing insurance journey that's been tried and tested in the market, people have used it, we found that there are certain drop-off points and we fixed all of that, then our template helps us not like the second time a conversation designer is to pick up, there's a ready-made template available for them to pick up and use. So yeah, that's primarily how our playbook strategy works. But we also have a public domain. We call it the Conversation Design Handbook, but it contains a bunch of practices on content formatting, things like how do you initiate a conversation, because there are fixed ways that people typically tend to start conversations, and obviously as we keep going and keep seeing data, it keeps changing. But yeah, that's our playbook is a combination of templates and best practices and new research that comes up every day. So yeah.
That sounds super useful. I think your team is probably super happy to have that on hand. Do any of the other panelists have something similar in their roles, or other things that have worked for them that have been similar templates or canvases?
I would just quickly, we've got a bunch of tools that we've developed internally over time that help us kind of get a kickstart on projects. But something that we always do with our partners is, before we start conversational design for them on projects, we normally design a customized playbook for their brand. And so if you can design a playbook that's assigned to the brand first, that has the consumer insights and the tone and the branding and what are we going to do and how are we going to approach it, then that conversational design actually is a lot easier. And you're not like constantly going back trying to figure out what to do next. You have it anchored. So we have tools we use, but we also generally will create a custom playbook for each execution that we're doing, which makes it easier.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective to have from like an agency perspective versus a larger corporation that has, like one goal, and you have multiple goals for your clients, which makes a lot of sense. Does anyone else want to hop in before we move on? All right, next question. So the next question is, how do you and your team create advanced conversational engagement tactics? Let's start with Brandon from Skilled.
So that's a great question. So that kind of goes back to the prior question to a degree, in that we put a lot of work before we kick off a project in putting that kind of playbook together for each client, each project. And included in that playbook that we're getting from research and creative sessions and consumer insights research and surveys, we determine kind of what are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve, and then what can we do to get that. So, engagement tactics that we'll leverage will just be different conversational design elements that we think might drive better completion rates or better retention, right? We might allow people to unlock something or achieve something or use affirmations in a certain way. We might leverage features. We are constantly in voice using contact permissions or user permissions to grab people's phone numbers, to send them a text message, to take them out to another channel. So we're using scripting however we can creatively to drive engagement. We're using features and tools that are available to us to drive engagement. And then we also think voice is not just like a singular product. It's got to work in an omni-channel manner. So we're thinking about how can we leverage your website, your mobile app, your social channels to create like a cycle that we can bring people back into. So it's, as James said, nuanced, but lots of different engagement tactics.
Yeah, definitely. And there's so many opportunities with so many different channels and multimodal experiences that you can create something that's super seamless and feels incredible and delightful for your end user. That sounds incredible. Do any other panelists have ways for engagement metrics? All right, let's go on to the next question. So the next question is for approaching and designing for complex business processes. Let's start with Nick. You mentioned that you had experience in your work designing experiences for enterprise level companies. Do you want to elaborate a little bit more on that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think it even goes back to the previous question as well, as where, Brandon's looking more at external on brands and like to consumers. A lot of my bots that I've developed are internal facing. And so, your user base is a bit different. And a lot of times they're either required to use this software or they want to use it because it automates some process for them. And so when you look at it at an enterprise level too, you still have to do that same type of scoping exercise to really figure out what makes sense to automate and what makes sense to do first. And that, there's many different factors that come in there, from executive all the way down to, you can talk to, physical call center agents if you need to see what are they doing during their day. Like, for instance, you can sit side by side with a recruiter and realize that they're doing 32 button clicks to do one thing that could be done with voice. And so when you start putting things in perspective there from an internal operation standpoint, it's easier for you to scope out for the enterprise, and you have to keep that use case very concrete, or it's going to go in every direction it possibly could.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of call center agents, sometimes we have to design and be prepared to pass along the customer or end user to a human. James, you mentioned that in ConciergeBot, you sometimes need to prepare for that. What is that experience like for you and your team?
Yes. So thank you, Christy. That's an excellent question, because I think that conversational assistants always work in sync with human customer support people or staff, along with engaging customers. It's not a one or the other proposition. There are times when you would want to escalate or hand over a conversation to a human, and I think that there's kind of three main situations where you might want to do that. And I think one is when the customer brings up something, depending on the context of the stay. So we really started in that hospitality space. I got inspired to build ConciergeBot based on my experiences as an Airbnb host for a vacation home that I own where I don't live. And I wanted guests to be able to get questions to get answers to routine questions that they had without having to wait for me or the host to respond. But I think that there are still there are situations that you wouldn't maybe want a bot to like things that a bot can't do, like unclog a toilet or unlock a door. If you're locked out, your toilet is clogged. Even if the bot knows, even if the conversational assistant, can respond to say, okay, a human, I've escalated your request, a person's on the way, you might still want to know that the request went through. You might still want to hear a human call you back at your phone number with an ETA that help is on the way. So there are those sort of urgent situations, and based on some of our clients' needs, we have built in that capability where they do get an automated response, sort of like a confirmation, but they also get a follow up from a human to say that their situation is being handled and with that time. The next situation I think is when a bot gets stuck. So I think we can conversationally design, we can build templates and playbooks to account for everything, but voice is itself and text is very divergent. And so there are times when you might encounter a situation where a bot doesn't maybe understand the question, even if you think you answered it correctly. That's all subject to interpretation by the customer. So they may say, well, you didn't answer my question, or that wasn't the right response. And in that sense, you want to make sure that then you hand it over to a human who can better service their need. I think the other situation is that when a customer specifically asks to speak to someone, I think we've all had that experience of being on a voice line and pressing 0 to speak to someone. I think that again, the voice assistants and chat assistants are here to augment and assist in that customer experience, not to necessarily replace speaking to a person. So in that situation where they do ask specifically, I'd like to speak to someone, I think that in that case situation, we do either hand the conversation directly over to a human in the chat, or give them instructions to connect to a human, or just respond and escalate internally with a response that, a human will be in contact with you shortly.
Yeah, wonderful. I mean, ultimately, we're trying to create experiences that make people's lives easier, and we don't want to upset them in any way or make them frustrated. Do any of the other panelists have other complex business solutions that they have had to create in their roles?
Yeah, for sure. So with when you're building virtual assistants for other companies, obviously their internal process is what you want to convert into a virtual assistant experience, right? And James did touch upon this, and it's so important to prioritize, because whenever any brand thinks about, hey, we need to have a virtual assistant, there's a million ideas that come through on paper, and everything is important because every probably a use case that affects another team. So everyone wants to push their use case forward. So it's important to prioritize as soon as you break down each use case that, hey, this is the problem that's the most important. This is the problem that's causing the most disruption in our call center. This is what's requiring the most wait time. So I think prioritizing is so important, and I cannot stress that enough. Every single time we have a client come in, that's the first thing we try to sit and do. And also it's important to just make all the stakeholders a part of that conversation. When you break a complex problem down, sometimes the solution is with the person who brought the problem in. So you kind of sit with them and try to understand where they are coming from, and take their perspective when you try and break complex problem down.
Yes, all very good points. So the final question we have for the panel before we switch over to the audience questions, as you were thinking about your conversational strategy, and as we mentioned before, there are so many different mediums that we can use to connect with our users. And there are some specific channel interfaces that you need to make adjustments for, things like WhatsApp or Apple Business Chat. What sort of things have you had to take into consideration into your strategy? I want to start with Michelle. You mentioned that WhatsApp was the new frontier, and I'm very curious to know what you mean by that.
For sure. So WhatsApp in India is, everybody's grandmom is on WhatsApp, right? So it's like SMS in the US. So everyone is on WhatsApp. It's the largest platform. It's the cause for a bunch of fake news scandals, the way Facebook is in the US, I've heard. So for platforms like WhatsApp, the primary consideration is that it's a private messaging channel. So when WhatsApp started opening it up for businesses to come in and start building automated experiences, there are no UI elements. It's almost equivalent to building a voice assistant, because you have no buttons, no carousels, nothing to play with. But people want to do very complex things on WhatsApp. They want to sell, they want to have complex cart management and cataloging. They want to do claim management on WhatsApp. It's ridiculous it's ridiculous. It's wonderful to see how brands are thinking about using WhatsApp, because it's such uncharted territory. And you can do anything on WhatsApp, but you only have words to play with. So it's a big consideration. And also WhatsApp's a private channel, right? It's not there for a business to promote. Nobody wants to open up their private messaging channel where they have their grandmom and grandchildren pictures floating around. That's not where you want a business to say, hey, I have something to sell you. So it's very different when you're, and I think every messaging platform has its own, the user comes in with something in mind. So it's important to keep that privacy and that whole scenario in mind while designing.
Yeah, for sure. Have any of the other panelists had to create different things for particular channels before, or things that you think are interesting or things people should keep in consideration?
Yeah, like so like when I look at a use case or anyone comes and say, hey, I want you to build this experience, the first thing I think about is voice first. So in my mind, I'm designing it voice first, but in practice, I'm designing it SMS first. Like, so to Michelle's point is like, if I can build an experience that is effective using only words and not using any other multimedia or any other buttons or any graphical elements, then like that's the perfect Pareto optimal design. And then everything else can get added on top of that to enhance the design. But at its core, it's still very conversational. And so what I've sort of learned is even going as far as, getting an element that looks like an iPhone and start typing your response into the iPhone to see how many characters, what does it actually look like when it comes across. And what the formatting comes into as well. And I think if you start the design from like the hardest type of design you can do, then it's easier for you to sort of push that out to the other, the other channels.
Yes, very good points. Go ahead.
I was going to just add that, for us, there's like a whole other conversation about voice as a channel versus a user interface, right? There's like Amazon and Google as a channel, and then there's a whole big user interface thing that's blowing up this year. But for us to think about the channels themselves, there's two big areas that we separate in terms of platform, and it's Amazon and Google used to be very, very similar in terms of the experiences you could create in the feature sets. Over the last, I'd say 12 months, they've really diverged in terms of like what experiences they are trying to drive and what tool sets they're releasing. So there's a real subtle nuance to if you're going to deploy something on Amazon and Google, thinking about what's similar and then what's different and what tools can you use on the different platforms. And then even for us, kind of the thing that maybe gets left behind but needs to be thought of a lot in advance that we've learned over time is the different modalities. So you might be designing something for a headless device, and then you realize when you launch it on a screen device, you missed this great opportunity. Or you might design something for a screen device, and then you go to a headless device and it's awkward, right? So now when we design an experience, we're mapping out literally every single device from screened, headless, mobile, Android, iOS. How could someone interface with this? And we're mapping out the subtle nuances of the difference in the conversation and how do we optimize for it. So once we started doing that, it was a little bit more work in the upfront, but the experiences themselves started to be much better for everybody. And depending on the experience, you see usage that's different on every platform. So you got to think in that way.
I'd like to kind of share our own experiences too. At ConciergeBot, we often build sort of omni-channel solutions for a single client. So like we might have the same internal users and customers using both voice and chat. And so what we find sometimes is that something that a message that's great on the chatbot we might actually be able to read something faster than we may want to hear it. So something that's several sentences long might be fine for a text message, but in a voice of sort of like a phone experience, that the user may not want to have the patience to hear that. So you have to sort of account from a design standpoint, like, is this going to translate over voice, and are we going to keep people listening for a long time? Do we want to have pauses? Do we want to confirm inputs like did somebody say something into a device? Did we capture that correctly? We might want to confirm that versus like in a text message that's much easier. So sometimes the data you get, the inputs from users are much cleaner in a messaging platform versus voice. So that's another design consideration, that you want to have those prompts, you want to have those confirmations, but then it also creates a much longer experience. And so the time of the experience is also something to keep, because people usually want to get the information they need or get the service they need, and then they want to end the conversation. They don't want to have long conversations with a bot necessarily.
Yeah, I previously worked in digital marketing and content strategy, and when you were creating for social media, there was this perception that you could create the same content across every single social media platform, but it's a similar situation. You have to tailor the content for the platform and how people use it. So all of these are really great points to keep in mind when designing a conversational strategy. All right, so we're going to head over to the audience questions. And right now, the most popular question from our audience is, how can we do a better job in the industry of advancing human-centered voice experiences rather than the more common practice of leading with technology?
I'll just do a quick one. This is like such an important topic. And we always, when we're doing brainstorms with clients, early brainstorms before you've done like a full consumer insight survey or research, there's always a couple ideas that bubble up to the top. It's like, oh, well, we're a food brand, we should do X, right? And that first instinct might be in like the realm of what the right use case is, but we always find that you're like 1 or 2 degrees off from what the real experience should be. So I think that a lot of people kind of rush into building. They're either leading, as you said, with the technology that they're familiar with or is available to them, or they're just like leading with an idea. They're like, this idea is cool, I'm going to build it, and then I'm going to be a successful conversation experience, right? And we found that either A, if you can spend more time in the upfront doing some deep thought and some strategy, run a survey monkey and just get some feedback on what people are doing, you save yourself a lot of headache later on. And then for us, we tell our clients, like whether it's a week or 2 or 3 or 4, we call it live testing, where before we'll put a heavy marketing budget behind an experience, we'll do live testing with live users. It could be 50, 100, a couple thousand people. And the insights that we garner from the first few weeks of analytics drive the biggest increase in experience performance that we have. we can speculate all we want before launching, but once you've launched, pay attention to those first few weeks and then leave room for more iteration. So that was much longer than I thought it was going to be, but it's like strategy in the upfront and then paying attention to your analytics. And that sounds like a dry, techie thing, but it really does go a very far way.
So the way at ConciergeBot that we deal with the human-centered approach to this technology versus technology first is that we really think about the going back to nuance, which is what I think of when I think of conversational design, is that speech, which is these are all natural language, voice apps, chatbots. They're nuanced by language, culture, generationally, how we speak to each other, education, regional. And so we really try to think about the audience that we're speaking to, and does the bot sort of speak in a language, in a context that is suitable for our audience. And so so for example, like people might be calling who maybe aren't calling into a voice app that they're not familiar with using them, or they don't really understand the capabilities. It's sort of like we want to keep things simple, flexible, and like Brandon said, like just it really like taking that intake and iterating over what we see from user feedback or from actually analyzing the conversations. You learn a lot just by looking at the logs and the chat history of what are people actually saying to your assistants, and then making improvements over that. So that's sort of how we take that approach, is really thinking about like what is sort of the conversational context from a branding and cultural perspective, from the point of view of that person that we're trying to target, versus just saying, okay, this is the technology, here's a chatbot, here's a voice app, and you have to consider the factors of who is actually using it, because it is so new, because people do have different comfort levels and different ways of engaging and speaking. And so the bot has to, the assistants have to reflect that as well.
Yeah, I mean, the number one source for what will make more human design are other humans. So we don't have a shortage of humans. Go find them. Okay, so our next question, can you share an example of a business or product request that was not appropriate for a conversational experience, and how did you navigate that decision?
So I can speak to that. So we had a client who said, I want to automate HR, want a big lofty goal. Like, what does that actually mean? And we sort of narrowed it down to even like still a very large bucket, but in recruitment. And they wanted to make a chat experience, a SMS and on-screen experience for their interview process. So they wanted to automate their interviews all the way through. And I think there's some debate in the space for this, but I personally don't believe that a voice or chat experience should do the actual interviewing of the candidate, no matter what the position is, but could they do part of it? And so when we went through the exercise with them, is they started, they wanted this one big thing, they wanted to automate all their interviews. But as we sort of did an analysis and an audit of their processes, we found out that the majority of their time was actually spent either pre-screening or scheduling the interview. The interview was actually only 30, 45 minutes long, but they would spend 2 hours per candidate just trying to track them down to schedule that interview. So it's like, okay, let's look back at this and figure out like what makes sense to automate. And so like you have to, I think, number one, like set expectations from the get-go. And I think we heard Brandon talk about it, as well as James and Michelle as well. It's like when a customer comes to you and they're like, we want to build this, you have to really take all of the tools and things that you have at your disposal and figure out, does this actually make sense for something to do? And then iteratively build while using user data to figure out, okay, well, I was also kind of wrong here, but I was really right over here as well. And you tweak it, and it's very iterative. And I think a lot of times, especially at the enterprise level, people forget it's not building a website. It's not making a button, and the button, you click the button, and it does something. Like, it's going to evolve. It's conversational. And the happy path is often you often divert from that. And you can only figure that out after you have something that's deployed in some type of manner.
The next question from our audience kind of goes in the opposite, on the opposite end of the spectrum. So what would you consider are elements that are necessary to make a good use case for a conversational design or conversational AI?
I think I would answer that by just two very simple questions. Number one, do people want this problem solved? Are people asking for this? And where are they asking for it? Are they asking for it on call? Are they asking for it on chat? Is it on WhatsApp? Is it on Facebook? I think using any and all existing information that you have is so important. So do people want to solve it? Do people want this problem solved, and where? That it's a simple matter.
I would agree with that. You know, is it tied to a consumer insight that says this is a pain point we're solving, or this is a way that people want to engage with you? And then the other big point is it better in this channel, right? So there's a lot of cool use cases where you can just scrape someone's website or mobile app and put it into voice, but is it going to actually take longer and be more friction? And guess what? No one's going to do it. They're going to go to the website or the mobile app. So is it a good consumer insight? Cool. And then will it actually work in the channel? That's the second check. And there's a lot of other items, but those are our two big check boxes.
Yeah, those are really good places to start for sure, and good things to take into consideration. So this space of conversational design and conversational technology is growing rapidly, and there are so many new jobs popping up everywhere. So naturally, our community is curious, what skills are you looking for in a new hire?
I can do a quick one because we are hiring right now. We're looking for a lot of different types of people. I mean, we have like some technical roles open, front-end developers, but we are looking for two specific types of people in creative. And this is really important to conversational strategy. So we're looking for creative strategists, people that we call it like lightning in a bottle, weird brains. And we think that the challenge with voice and chatbots right now is people are kind of staying within the guardrails, and nobody is inventing that like Cannes Lion award-winning, industry-shaking experience. So we're looking for creative strategists who can bring in those like bold ideas and help like foster those bold ideas through the production process. And then we're also looking for people that are some blend of copywriters and not really UX designers, but more copywriters. We need more diverse voices. A lot of voice experiences and chatbots sound very utilitarian. So for us, we're trying to ratchet up the creativity this year in terms of strategy creative. And then are you a copywriter or a conversational designer who can really like infuse some great tone and some subtle nuance and a little bit of like a wink with utility. So two big areas for us is just like bold creative.
Anyone else hiring? Give a shout out now.
Go ahead.
So we're, go ahead, Michelle. Somebody else wants with somebody else. So yeah, we've got some exciting prospects in the pipeline, and we're looking to grow. I think the thing that we look for, as far as like from a technical standpoint, is have you sort of experimented with this chatbot technology? Like there's lots of different platforms, and I think that they are all somewhat similar. So I would be looking for like, have you sort of like what's your sort of experience? Do you have like Brandon mentioned, like having that sort of like those ideas? Do you have ideas about how they can be better versus like what's out there? But then if you have that sort of like core experience, I think that you can still learn like our stack and our platform. So I would be looking for like, do you have that sort of base technical skills? And then have you experimented? Because I think that there are lots of self-serve tools. So I would be looking for like someone who has that curiosity and has experimented. So I think that that's a good exercise if you're looking for positions in a space. And so that's what we would be looking. That's what we at ConciergeBot would be looking for as we grow our team.
Michelle, were you going to say something?
One small point. Yes. So in India, I think the whole context is a bit different. So enterprise conversation design is a big focus in India, especially with the massive call center system here. So most companies, from what I've seen, I would say are looking for full stack conversation designers. So by full stack conversation designer, I mean it's a copywriter meets someone who can chart out UX journeys and paths, understands technology, and is able to understand the basics of training a machine learning and an AI model. So yeah, that's primarily a profile that works very well, at least in enterprise conversation design. That's what most companies in this space look for.
Right on. We got some responses in the chat as well, in case you missed it. We have Carol Valdez is also hiring. She put her LinkedIn in the chat. And Meredith Schultz is also hiring. She's put her LinkedIn in the chat if you want to reach out to them. So our next question is, what kind of tools are you using to deliver conversational design to developers? So that sort of handoff between your conversation designers and the more technical side of things.
I'll give you a quick, like so we're using a bunch of different tools. When we're doing like VUXs and happy paths, we are using like Lucid charts. We are storing all of our copy and directions and technical notes in Airtable, which we're also now using as like a project management tool. And we haven't really used a lot of the skill like builder platforms or modeling platforms yet. Although I know that there's a provider or two in this room that we'd be happy to chat with. Other people could use. But I think there is a lot of value in using some of these modeling tools because it's great to kind of hear what you're thinking about through a demo before you move forward. But a lot of the tools that we use are more about like organizing copy, organizing technical notes, or organizing direction, project plans, UX charts, things like that.
Anyone else got any tools they want to shout out?
Yeah, seconded on that. So we really building at scale. So at Haptik, we experimented. We started, in fact, with Google Sheets of all things, and then moved on to Lucid Chart, and that's where we store all of our journeys, our notes. We have experimented with Botmock and Miro. A lot of our new clients are actually, we have a model where you can come to our platform and build and design on your own. So yeah, we've seen a bunch of people use so many different tools, and it works very well depending on their context and how early they want to see a design and what they're really trying to do. So, yeah.
All right, let's go on to the next question from our audience. They are wondering how you plan for marketing and making sure people find out about your voice bot. But we can explain that as well to the experiences that you're designing in your roles as well.
I'll jump back in again. Because we're an agency and everything that we're doing is public facing most of the time, and it's for specific projects or ongoing clients. It's really important. We always put together a go-to-market strategy, and we always make sure that we put that go-to-market strategy in like early strategy decks. So it's not just the concept, it's how we're going to bring this to market. And then, 6 to 8 weeks out from launch, we're really starting to bring these go-to-market strategies to our clients to say, you're spending X on the experience, you better spend Y on distribution of it, or you really need to figure out how to use your own channels or social channels, or you can use your own channels, you can earn channels, you can pay for channels, right? If you're small, own channels, get gritty, some elbow grease. If you have the capacity to earn views and traffic, you can do that through PR. And if you've got budget, you should really spend budget, and you should pay for some media and figure out where you can do it. So we always think really strategically about the consumer that's using this and how do we segment them and target them specifically. And then for us, a lot of it is about driving retention. So we're very big on finding ways to capture data about people, whether it's like a tracking pixel on a quick link, or a phone number that we grabbed and threw into a CRM so we can follow up with people, or turning on notifications, or letting people know they unlocked something and to come back for another session to see what they unlocked. So it's a lot of like, how do we drive that retention? But there's always a pretty robust go-to-market strategy assigned to it that you should be thinking about weeks before you launch, so it's included, not so you're kind of like launched and then wondering why you're plateaued and then trying to figure it out. Although you could do that too. As long as you're working on it at some point, that's all that really matters.
All right. Our next question is really relevant for some of our panelists. Is there a list of activities or steps you go through with a potential client? And I will add in also stakeholders in your company when you are trying to build experiences for them as well.
We follow just like a high level methodology of discovery, design, development, and deployment. And then what we call drive results, which is also just the iterative process after there's, something is launched. But and generally, I mean, if in a perfect world, the discovery and design phases are twice as long as the development and deployment phases, because I think the more time you spend up front, I think we've heard pretty much every panelist echo that the more time you spend up front with the client, figuring out what makes sense, what do they want to do, and what direction, and really like hashing that out is just going to pay dividends in the long term when you're building out this experience, because it makes you more agile in the long run if you figure that out to start with.
I think that's basically the framework, what Nick said. We've had to formalize it a lot because we needed to do it very quickly for a lot of clients, and we needed to have a book in place that other people could replicate. So there is if you want a formal framework to it, I just flesh that out a bit more. We have a 12-step process that we follow. So business requirement, a little bit of brand research, getting all your ducks in a row. And then after that, we have our user persona, bot persona creation. User persona is usually in place. You just use that to create a complementing bot personality. Then you set up, obviously, this flowchart setup, if that hasn't happened, if it's a self-serve style model. And then we go into happy flow design, which is easier if you have a template. And then detailed flow design with sitting down with developers to understand if it's a very complicated, deeply integrated kind of a bot that requires a lot of APIs. We obviously have a stage where we sit down with developers and our QA team, understand what could go wrong from a technical perspective. Once all of this is in place, the design that we hand over to our development team goes through a UX review. We have a checklist in place that at least takes care of the fundamentals, on top of which you obviously have not like subjective design opinions that's given by the conversation design team. And that's when you build. But even after build, we have UX retros and focus groups and things like that to just make sure that you're delivering a robust experience in case anyone's looking for a very formal framework. And then, yeah.
I think
a list.
I was going to say that's an awesome process when you're building. Something I would just quickly add to it is before you start that process, like Christy, you work in a large organization doing conversation design. We're an agency. At some point, both of us, whether I'm pitching to a client or you're pitching the stakeholders, you're trying to get budget and resource allocation. So for us, education is such a big part of like if you can bring people into, especially senior stakeholders, into like the educational process, then they feel much more invested and they understand it much more. And then you have a better capacity to get more budget, more readily available, longer term. So if you're selling to somebody or if you're doing it within your own company, like early education just really opens doors and opens eyes. It's really powerful.
Yes, understanding. It's powerful for sure.
That's a good point too, because I think one thing that it's really easy to forget when you're building for a bunch of different clients is that clients they're not as educated as they would be developing a web app, right? So like they already have teams that have developed web apps before. They can talk the talk. You can put a developer from your team and develop from their team, and there's no there's no loss in transmission of information. But a lot of times these companies have absolutely no clue within the conversational design space. So it really is your job to educate them and set those expectations along the way while you're educating them on their use case. I mean, essentially you use their use case to educate them on conversational design.
Right on. Okay. So the next question we've already kind of touched upon before, so I'm going to skip to the next one. What is the one thing you have changed recently about the way you approach conversation design?
I think for ConciergeBot, what we've changed is really, I think, thinking about the omni-channel experience, like I mentioned before, like not thinking chat first or voice first, but thinking about the entire experience, and then the extent of the relationship. So I think that sometimes there's an opportunity once you've engaged with a guest to continue that conversation going, especially if has been a positive experience. So if you have high engagement, are there other opportunities to I hate to use this word, but upsell? Like you could upsell, or you could inform them of other things that they might be able to do with that service. Sometimes they don't know. I think that's the other thing that we sometimes assume too, is that the user knows, like I think Michelle mentioned, like with WhatsApp, you're trying to do all these complex things, but not everybody's going to know. So you have to, and I think like some of the other panelists have mentioned, like educating people, like you not just at the client level, but also in that moment. Can you educate people in the sort of conversational design experience? Are there moments to educate people on what else you can do beyond whatever it is you just help them with? And I think that there are we're evaluating different ways to do that. And that's where the creativity comes in. I think that that's a part of the design process also, that how do you, in limited space, right? You don't have a lot of real estate on a smartphone or time in a voice response. But I think that that's that's something that we've changed, is really thinking about how do we improve engagement by really not just educating the end user.
Anyone else want to hop in? Perhaps how the pandemic has affected things you've had to change.
Just one, I think couple of additional things. So when you're designing for enterprise, it's easy to just, hey, I'm going to take this back home. I loved your feedback. I'm going to work on it, and I'll come back and I'll give you a new design. It's very tempting to do that, and we did that initially. It's a very natural way. We recently started doing this thing where we would sit down and co-design sessions. It's very difficult to get senior leaders of big corporations to sit down with you and do design, but we explain the benefits, and that has given us, it's made a world of a difference. They feel so much more invested. It's complicated. They're often very reluctant to, hey, why am I doing this? Or I'm really scared. You have to sit down with me and help me every step of the way. But inviting not just feedback, but co-designing has helped us a lot. And also personally, as a conversation designer, I'm attempting to look a lot more at data because there's analytics available. So if it's, I think all of the panelists have mentioned this, it's important to go back and rework your bot and look at all this wealth of information out there and see what can be brought back. So, yeah.
I love that. I love that. Incorporating your people early on. That's really great. Anyone else? All right, we're coming up on time. So we just have one more question that we have time for. And this one kind of touches on something that we talked about a little bit earlier about that hybrid talent. So for people who are transitioning into conversational strategy from content strategy, what are some good tips, first steps for us to recognize what is the difference and things that are different between the two?
So when we just first started, our first couple of copywriters, which were like, conversational designer wasn't even a thing in 2016. We hired comedians in New York. We're based in New York.
Love it.
So we hired comedians because comedians know how to talk to a crowd efficiently with a good punchline and move you forward. And we found a lot of really early success in that. So and what we find when we bring in traditional copywriters or traditional content writers is they're writing for written word. They're writing for somebody is going to see this, and they're even being cute with like phrasing of words and using kind of interesting things, and no one's going to see it. So it needs to be heard. So I'd say, test a lot where you're like, mock yourself up writing a bunch of voice or chat bots. Well, chat bots you would read, sorry. So voice, I'm thinking about voice. Write down a bunch and then put them through a simulator, like a bot mock or any other platform, and then listen to it. And you'll start to notice the awkwardness when you take written word and you try and just SSML translate it to spoken word. So spend a lot of time nuancing, and we always call it like killing your darlings, right? Like you've got to cut out a lot of words. You've got to change how you write. So how do you deliver wit and engaging content with utility, and for the spoken word is important.
This is so interesting to me because I'm a writer by profession. So when I joined Haptik, there was no conversation designer, and I joined as content strategist. That was my role. And one of the most important things for me to realize, and I've received this, what I've learned from my design managers is that UX writers, inherently, we empathize with people. We write from their perspective, especially if you're from marketing side, you're already thinking about how this will appeal, how can I sell something? It's already there. I think you just need to bring in a lot of UX thought about how, thinking not just for one person reading your email or one person reading your blog, because it's a very natural writer thing to do. How will that one person feel? It's important to think about it as a user experience design. It's hundreds of people in different contexts. So think like a UX designer, to take a course, read a few blogs, read a few books. I think that helped me also convert my skill set into what I've been doing. So yeah, I hope that helps.
Anyone else want to hop in? I just wanted to add a little 2 cents. I heard an NPR segment that was talking about how some of the larger companies like Google and Apple were hiring comedians as well to help with their smart speakers. So I think that makes a lot of sense, especially if you're trying to humanize technology. Wit and humor are what connect with people, especially in voice. So very, very good tip there. All right, everybody, it seems like we're at the end of the road for today. We are so excited that you joined us today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to spend a little time with us and nerd out about conversational technology. We've just posted the links in the chat again if you want to join our community, our newsletter. Follow us on Eventbrite so you know what's coming up next. And have a good night, everyone. We'll see you later.